Hello guys, you are welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today we would look at risk management. Risk is a core area in cybersecurity, especially if you are trying to get into governance, risk and compliance, or you're trying to specialize in governance, risk and compliance, which is one of the domains in cybersecurity. Risk management needs to be your best friend, and today we are going to look at that shortly. So what is risk? Risk is the combination of threat, vulnerability, and impact. And to understand risk, you need to understand threat, vulnerability, and impact. So what is threat? Threat is anything with the potential to cause harm or damage. Vulnerability are weaknesses or flaws that can be exploited by threats. Impact, when we say impact, we're looking at how much the aftermath, what will be the effect of this if it happens. So in very simple terms, let's use layman examples. Let's say you stay in an area where there's frequent occurrence of robbery attacks. That is a threat. If you leave your doors or windows open, that is a vulnerability. What is now the potential or probability that the robbers or thieves will exploit the vulnerability that you don't lock your doors or windows? And what will the impact be? Now that is risk. Risk is the probability that an event will happen and the impact of that event when it happens. And that event comes from when a threat exploits a vulnerability. What we look at is how likely is it to happen. In this case, if you leave your door open and there's constant robbery attacks in your area, then there's very high probability that one day those robbers will get into your home. So if they get in and steal your life savings or your valuable, what will be the impact on you? And that is what we look at when we talk about risk in cybersecurity. So the risk equation is the relationship between threats, vulnerability, and impacts, as we have explained. Now let's look at threats in more details and in cybersecurity terms. So a threat is an event or condition that can lead to harm. So it's anything that can cause harm. And this threat, it could be natural threats. This could be earthquakes, floods, wildfires, and it could be human-caused threats, which is from cyber attacks, from insider threats. We talked about insider threats in one of the videos we have made in the course of this course. And terrorism is another threat. Sabotage, which is when a competitor may hire someone to sabotage our production line. And there are also technological threats, which is system failures, data breaches, ransomware, power outages. And we looked at some of those attacks in the beginning of this course. Those attacks are threats. Vulnerabilities are weaknesses or flaws that can be exploited by threats. And it could be physical vulnerabilities. And that is one example that I've given in the beginning of this video, that you leave your door open. That's a physical vulnerability. In context of cybersecurity, it could be unsecured access to your building, your office, where you do your business. It could be poor building construction. Let's say you live in a place where there's constant flood, and the way you constructed your buildings in a way that water can easily get could be a big issue. And it could also be weak passwords. So, for example, attackers are always looking for how to get into your systems. And you use weak passwords. You use 123 or use dictionary passwords like dog, cat, things like that. That is a vulnerability. Total risk is the product of three factors: threat, vulnerability, and asset value. So threat, we've talked about threat. It is anything that can cause harm. Vulnerability is weaknesses in your system. Asset value is the cost or the significance of the asset you're trying to protect. And this could be financial, it could be operational, it could be reputational. And when we're looking at total risk, we are looking at the threat, the vulnerability, and the cost of that asset. Then there's something called residual risk. Residual risk is the risk that remains after we have implemented some countermeasures. So let's say that I've realized that there are constant robbery attacks on this street, and I've decided to change my locks to even make it more sophisticated for robbers to get in. Probably, change the window blinds, change everything to make it more secure. Now that is me trying to prevent those attackers or those thieves from getting into my building. That is me putting up a countermeasure, to manage that risk. So what remains after you have implemented those countermeasures is what we call residual risk. So there will always be risk remaining. Like we say, no organization is 100% secure. And in cybersecurity, it's not a matter of will it happen, it is a matter of when it happens. And that is why risk management is very, very important. There's a structured approach to managing risk. First thing we do is identify the risk. And when we are looking at identify the risk, one of the things we look at is our assets. What are we trying to protect? If I leave my door open and there's robbery attack, but there's nothing in the house for them to take, yeah, you can have a fun day, have a nice time, because there's no asset. There's nothing valuable for them to take, even if they get into the house. So one of the things we first do when we are looking at risk management is that we first identify the risk. And the first place to begin is to look at, number one, what is our organization doing? And that's where we look at, the vision or the mission of their organization. And then we look at assets that are connected to that vision. How are they able to carry out that vision? What do they use? What are the assets, that they use to carry out that vision? Once we identify those assets, we now start looking at, what are the threats? What are the vulnerabilities? And what will be the impacts? And so the next phase is analysis. And this is where we analyze it. Okay, we have identified this is our business processes. This is what we do. This is what we do to make our customers happy or to be able to offer services to our customers. Now, what are the threats? Then we now look at what are the vulnerabilities. Which vulnerabilities do we even have within our organization that a threat can exploit? The next thing we look at is the likelihood. How likely is this to happen? How likely is this to happen? And this is how we can prioritize risk. To say, this is a high risk, depending on our analysis. This is a medium risk. This is a low risk. And the next thing is, what do we do? And that's where risk response comes into play. And then we begin to implement strategies, to mitigate, to transfer, to accept, or to avoid the prioritized risk. We will look at risk responses shortly. The next is monitoring. We need to continuously monitor the risk, and we need to track the effectiveness of our risk responses. So we don't just say, we have applied risk response, so we have mitigated the risk, and you look the other way. No, you monitor the risk. How is this risk doing? How is the effectiveness of the countermeasures we have implemented? We look at it, we monitor it. Even risks that are low, a low risk can become a high risk, depending on what, applies in our environment or what the threat landscape is at that moment. So we need to constantly keep an eye on risk, no matter whether we have applied countermeasures or not. Now let's look at risk responses. So when we talk about countermeasures, risk responses are countermeasures. So the things that we do to prevent or to reduce, the impact of an identified risk. And the first thing we are going to look at is accept. So we can accept the risk, and this depends on what we want to do as an organization. Accepting the risk involves acknowledging the risk but deciding not to take any action due to its low likelihood or minimal impact. It could also be the cost. Sometimes the cost of mitigating a risk might be so high that if it's exploited, you will not even lose that much. Let's say the cost of mitigating a risk is tuning to about $10 million. And if that risk were to be exploited, it will cost us $1 million. As a businessman, what will you do? Would you use $10 million for a risk that will cost you $1 million? So it's a matter of weighing the risk and the benefits. It's a matter of weighing it. If we put up this countermeasure, how much would we save? How much would we lose? If we don't put it up, how much would we lose? How much would we save? And that is why a risk practitioner must think in terms of business, not just looking at, a risk or impact, vulnerability. No, you need to also consider the business aspect of it. How much would we gain? How much would we lose? So if I'm going to lose more in mitigating a risk, I can as well accept it. Another case to accept a risk is if it has low likelihood. Let's say the risk is not likely to happen. Even if I leave my door open, I live in an estate, or I live in a place where the place is heavily guarded. So even if I leave my door open, there's no threat. It's a low likelihood that a robber or a thief will come into my apartment. So I can decide to accept it that, I know I've acknowledged this risk. And that is that. Other risk response is avoid. Avoid is you eliminate, you stop doing what you do that is generating that risk. So that's it, eliminating the risk entirely by not engaging in activities that can generate it. So for example, if putting our customers' data in the cloud is causing a lot of issues due to misconfigurations and all those things, we can decide that, you know what, let's not put customers' data in the cloud. Let's avoid it entirely. The next risk response is mitigate, which is where we put measures in place to reduce the likelihood or the impact of the risk. For example, employees are using weak passwords. We come up with a policy and we say, this is how your password must be. You must apply complexity in your passwords. Password must be 12 character length. You use mixed characters. You make it very complex. So that is mitigation. Or we decide to say, okay, apart from password, let's use multi-factor authentication. So it's not just the password alone. There's also another way to verify that, oh, okay, it is this employee that is trying to access these services or this system. And we can also transfer the risk. We shift the risk to a third party. So we are saying, even if this happens, buy insurance to cover the potential losses from. So these are the risk responses. What you must never do is reject a risk. You either accept a risk, you avoid it, you mitigate it, you transfer it. Never reject it. Never say, oh, it cannot happen, just forget about it. No. So let's look at the importance of risk management in cybersecurity. Risk management helps us identify threats and vulnerabilities. So it's more like a proactive way. So we are identifying these threats and vulnerabilities before they happen and putting measures in place to prevent it. And it helps us to analyze risk. Like I said the other time, it is not all the risk we can treat. Even if you identify all the risk, you can't treat everything because of cost. So when it comes to that, we need to now prioritize and say, okay, what will cause the most harm, which will be the most impactful if it happens? And we can decide that we are going to look at these ones and we're going to keep our eye on the lower ones that will not be as impactful. And that is what risk management helps us to do it. So when we have a risk management plan, it helps our cybersecurity team to swiftly respond to breaches and minimize damage. Because yes, we know what to do if an accident happens. Like I said the other time, in cybersecurity, it's not a matter of if it will happen. It is a matter of when. And when it happens, what do we do? So it helps us protect critical assets. I think I've stated that enough. And it helps us ensure compliance. Companies must adhere to laws and standards that affect their area of operations. And risk management helps us to look at it. If there's anything that we're doing that will make us not comply to the laws and regulations that we need to comply to operate effectively, risk will help us identify it and we'll be able to put countermeasures in place. And we have come to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please do not forget to subscribe, like, and comment. This is what will make YouTube recommend these videos to other people who are in need of them. I appreciate your support and thank you very much.